Welcome to Avoidant Decoded, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind avoidant behavior, emotional distance, mixed signals, and the patterns that shape modern relationships. If you want to understand what happens inside an avoidant partner's mind and learn how to protect your own peace without losing yourself, you are in the right place. And if you want deeper insights, exclusive content, and more powerful relationship breakdowns, consider becoming a member of our channel. Now let's uncover the one shift that can completely change the way an avoidant partner responds to you. He is probably not going to chase you in the way you have been hoping for, not while the same pattern keeps making him feel pressured. And the frustrating part is that you may be reinforcing that pattern without realizing it. There is one subtle behavioral shift that can change the entire dynamic with an avoidant partner. It has nothing to do with becoming cold, playing hard to get, or pretending you do not care. In fact, it is almost the opposite. Once you understand it and genuinely practice it, you may begin to notice him reaching toward you in ways you have been trying to create through effort for a long time. If you have ever felt that the more you tried to get closer, the more he seemed to disappear, comment magnet below. I want to know how many of you recognize this exact cycle. And if this message already feels familiar, subscribe to Avoidant Decoded, because this channel is about understanding avoidant behavior without losing yourself in the process. Save this video so you can return to it when you feel the urge to chase, and turn on notifications for more conversations about what avoidant partners say and do when they are struggling with closeness. Now let us look at what is actually happening beneath the surface. One of the biggest misconceptions about an avoidant partner is that distance automatically means a lack of feelings. It does not always mean that. For some people with strong avoidant tendencies, emotional closeness can activate a sense of threat, not physical danger, but the fear of losing independence, control, identity, or emotional safety. At some point in his earlier life, closeness may have become associated with discomfort. Perhaps someone was overly intrusive. Perhaps emotional needs were ignored. Perhaps he learned that depending on another person only ended in disappointment. Sometimes there are several experiences layered together. Whatever the original source, he may eventually develop an adult pattern where he genuinely wants connection, while simultaneously becoming uncomfortable when that connection becomes too intense. That is why he can seem completely comfortable when things are casual and easy. He may be affectionate, attentive, playful, and interested when there is no emotional pressure. But once the relationship starts becoming more serious, once you become important to him, something inside him can shift. He usually will not announce, "I am becoming overwhelmed because I care about you." Instead, you see the behavior. His replies become slower. He suddenly becomes busy. He needs more time alone. His communication becomes more logical and less emotional. He may seem distant without giving you a clear explanation. And this is exactly where the cycle often begins. You notice him pulling away, and your anxiety immediately rises. You want to restore the connection, so you send another message. You ask whether everything is okay. You bring up the change in his behavior. You try to explain your feelings. You ask for reassurance. Every one of those actions can feel completely reasonable from your perspective because you are trying to protect the relationship. But from the perspective of an avoidant nervous system, repeated attempts to close the distance can feel like pressure. Then the cycle becomes predictable. He withdraws. You reach toward him. He experiences that reach as pressure. He creates even more distance. You become more anxious because he is now even farther away. You increase your efforts. He retreats again. Neither person necessarily intends to create this pattern, yet both nervous systems begin reacting to each other in ways that keep the cycle alive. And this brings us to the shift that can change everything. Stop being the person who automatically initiates the repair every time he creates distance. That does not mean disappearing to punish him. It does not mean pretending you are indifferent. It does not mean intentionally becoming cold so that he will panic and chase you. It means allowing some space to exist without immediately rushing in to eliminate it. If he pulls back, you do not automatically become responsible for restoring the connection. You do not need to send another message simply because the silence makes you uncomfortable. You do not have to ask what changed every time his energy shifts. You do not have to prove that you are still there by constantly reaching for him. Instead, you let him experience the natural space created by his own withdrawal. This matters because avoidant people often need to feel that connection is something they are freely choosing rather than something being demanded of them. When the pressure disappears, the internal resistance can also begin to settle, and something interesting can happen. He may start noticing your absence, not necessarily through some dramatic revelation, but through ordinary moments. He notices that you did not send the usual message. He realizes you did not check in. He sees that you continued with your day rather than waiting for him to return. The space becomes noticeable because you are no longer filling every empty moment. That can give his own desire room to emerge. But there is an important distinction here. You are not creating distance, so he will miss you. You are creating healthy space because you are no longer abandoning yourself to manage his emotions. That difference is everything. Imagine that he suddenly becomes quiet for a couple of days. The old response might be, "Hey, is something wrong? We have barely talked lately." You may genuinely mean it with love, but underneath the message there can also be anxiety saying, "Your distance is making me uncomfortable, and I need you to reassure me." Instead, imagine simply continuing with your own life. You work, you spend time with friends, you exercise, you pursue your goals, you enjoy your day. You do not create a performance designed to make him jealous, and you do not pretend that you are unaffected. You simply stop making his communication level the center of your emotional world. Then, when he comes back, you do not unload every emotion you experienced during his absence. You do not immediately tell him how worried you were. You do not make him responsible for repairing every uncomfortable feeling. You respond naturally and warmly. You can be happy to hear from him without acting as though you have been sitting beside your phone waiting for his name to appear. That is not manipulation. That is emotional independence. And there is a major difference between withholding affection and refusing to chase reassurance. You can care deeply about someone while allowing them to take responsibility for their own approach toward you. You can miss him without sending 5 messages. You can feel hurt without immediately turning that hurt into pressure. You can want commitment without begging someone to give it to you. You can love someone without making their emotional availability the measurement of your own worth. This is why the shift becomes so powerful. It removes you from the role of constantly trying to pull something out of him that he is not currently capable of giving freely. Instead, you become someone who is emotionally grounded and has a life that continues whether he is close or distant. That kind of stability can feel very different to an avoidant partner. Avoidant people are not necessarily searching for less love. Many of them actually want closeness very deeply. What they struggle with is closeness that feels suffocating, demanding, or threatening to their independence. They can tolerate connection much more easily when it comes with room to breathe. Think about what happens when you stop chasing. The relationship stops being a situation where one person continually reaches and the other continually retreats. The pressure begins to decrease, and when the pressure decreases, both people have an opportunity to see what is actually there. This is also why you should never turn this strategy into a game. If you stop messaging him while secretly thinking, "Now he is going to suffer and finally chase me," you have not really changed the pattern. You have simply changed the form of the pursuit. Your silence still revolves around him. Real change happens when your attention comes back to yourself. The next time he becomes distant, try something simple. Do not send the first message immediately. Notice what happens inside you. You may feel an intense urge to check your phone. You may reread old conversations. You may wonder whether you did something wrong. You may create 10 different explanations for his silence. Do not judge yourself for feeling those things. Just do not automatically act on them. The discomfort you experience does not necessarily mean that something is wrong with the relationship. Sometimes it simply means you are interrupting an old emotional habit. Let the feeling exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. Take a walk, call a friend, work on something meaningful, exercise, read, focus on your responsibilities. Do something that reminds you that your life exists independently of his current emotional state. The goal is not to make him chase you. The deeper goal is to stop chasing someone at the cost of your own peace. And ironically, that is often what creates the strongest shift in the dynamic. There are several patterns that can help you recognize what may be happening. One common pattern is the sudden disappearance. Everything feels wonderful. He is engaged, affectionate, and perhaps even talking about future possibilities. Then, seemingly without warning, he becomes distant. No major argument happened. Nothing obvious changed. Yet suddenly his energy is different. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this can happen when the relationship begins to feel more emotionally significant. The closer he feels, the more vulnerable he may feel. And vulnerability can trigger the instinct to retreat. Your first reaction may be to demand an explanation, but asking him to immediately explain an emotional reaction he may not understand himself can create even more pressure. Another common pattern is the hot and cold cycle. 1 week he is extremely attentive. He messages frequently, makes plans, and seems emotionally present. Then suddenly he becomes distant. Later he returns and becomes warm again. This can repeat over and over. The warm periods are not necessarily fake, and the distant periods do not necessarily mean his feelings disappeared. Sometimes both behaviors come from the same internal conflict. One part of him wants connection, while another part wants protection from too much closeness. The mistake is trying to make the warm period permanent by increasing your emotional investment as soon as he becomes available again. You respond with more messages, more questions, more reassurance, and more expectations. The emotional intensity rises. Eventually, he becomes overwhelmed and withdraws again. Then there is the almost commitment pattern. He talks about the future. He mentions places you might visit together. He talks about introducing you to people someday. He makes statements that sound like commitment, but when it comes to actually creating consistency in the present, he hesitates. This can be especially confusing because his words sound promising, but imagining a future is sometimes easier than becoming vulnerable in the present. Talking about a trip months from now requires less emotional exposure than consistently showing up today. If you recognize one of these patterns, do not immediately assume that every avoidant behavior means love. Understanding the pattern is not the same as excusing it. You still need to look at what someone consistently does. When he says, "I need space," it may mean that he feels overwhelmed and needs to regain a sense of emotional control. It does not automatically mean he has stopped caring. When he says, "I am not good at relationships," he may be expressing fear of failing, disappointing you, or becoming trapped by expectations. When he says, "Let us just see what happens," he may genuinely want the connection while still feeling uncomfortable defining it. But understanding the possible meaning behind his words should never become an excuse for accepting behavior that repeatedly hurts you. You can understand someone and still have boundaries. You can recognize his fear and still recognize your own needs. You can give him space without waiting indefinitely, and you can care about his attachment wounds without taking responsibility for healing them. This is one of the most important parts of the entire process. You cannot genuinely practice secure behavior while secretly monitoring him every few minutes. If you are constantly checking whether he has seen your message, looking at his online activity, rereading old conversations, and calculating how long it has been since he contacted you, your external behavior may look calm, while internally you are still trapped in the same anxious cycle. That is why this is not simply about changing your texting habits. It is about changing the relationship you have with your own anxiety. Ask yourself what you are really seeking when you feel compelled to contact him. Is it genuine connection, or are you trying to make an uncomfortable feeling disappear? Sometimes the urge to reach out has less to do with wanting to talk to him and more to do with wanting immediate reassurance that you have not been abandoned. If that is what is happening, sending the message may provide temporary relief, but it does not solve the deeper issue. Instead, you can learn to tolerate the uncertainty without immediately outsourcing your emotional regulation to him. And sometimes you will discover that your anxiety did not begin with this person. Maybe you have experienced withdrawal, inconsistency, rejection, or emotional distance before. Maybe you learned somewhere along the way that you have to work harder to keep people close. If so, this relationship may be activating an older wound. That does not make your feelings fake. It simply means that part of what you are dealing with may be bigger than this particular relationship. And there is another truth you need to remember. Space is not a magic formula. Giving an avoidant partner room does not guarantee that he will return, commit, or suddenly become emotionally available. If someone does not want the relationship, space cannot manufacture genuine desire. If someone is unwilling to work on their patterns, your perfect response cannot do the work for them. What space does provide is clarity. When you stop chasing, you finally get to see what happens without your constant effort holding everything together. Maybe he begins initiating more. Maybe he reaches out after previously disappearing. Maybe he starts making plans. Maybe he becomes more consistent. Those changes can tell you that there is genuine motivation on his side. But something else can happen too. You may discover that once you stop carrying the relationship, there is very little left. That can hurt deeply, but it is valuable information. You no longer have to wonder whether the relationship could work if you just tried harder. You get to see what he contributes when you stop doing all the emotional labor. And that clarity is worth more than endless uncertainty. If the shift is creating a healthier dynamic, you will usually notice small signs rather than one dramatic transformation. He may start contacting you first. He may ask about your life rather than simply responding to your messages. He may suggest plans instead of waiting for you to arrange everything. His communication may feel more natural rather than like an obligation. He may begin making small, consistent efforts. Those details matter. Real progress is usually measured through repeated behavior, not one emotional conversation or one passionate reunion. And if none of that happens, pay attention to that too. If he uses the space to disappear completely and makes no meaningful effort to reconnect, that is information about his current capacity. It is not proof that you are not attractive enough, loving enough, patient enough, or valuable enough. Sometimes the truth is simply that someone cannot offer the kind of relationship you need. That is painful, but it is much healthier than spending years trying to convince someone to become available. There is also a practical exercise you can begin immediately. The next time you want to contact him because he has gone quiet, pause before doing anything. Give yourself some time. Ask, if I knew with complete certainty that he still cared about me, would I still feel the need to send this message right now? If the answer is no, then the urge may be coming from anxiety rather than genuine connection. You do not have to suppress the urge. You simply do not have to obey it. Let the feeling rise and fall, then redirect your attention. The energy you use to spend monitoring his behavior can become energy invested in your own life. Work towards something. Spend time with people who make you feel grounded. Take care of your body. Build something. Learn something. Enjoy your own company. Every time you choose your own life, instead of obsessively monitoring his behavior, you reinforce a new belief. My life is not on hold because someone else is distant. That is powerful. And people who have genuinely built that kind of independence naturally carry themselves differently. Their communication feels different, their presence feels different, their relationships feel different. There is less desperation because there is less emotional dependence on one person's response. I also want you to allow yourself to grieve the relationship you wish you had. Sometimes the reason people keep chasing is because stopping would force them to admit that the relationship is not currently giving them what they hoped it would. That realization can feel like a loss. Let yourself feel it. You do not have to pretend that his distance does not hurt just because you are learning emotional independence. You can be disappointed and still choose not to chase. You can miss him and still maintain your dignity. You can want more and still refuse to beg for it. That is what secure behavior actually looks like. It is not becoming emotionless. It is learning that your emotions do not have to control every decision you make. If you have spent months or even years believing that more effort would finally make him understand, this may be difficult to accept. You may have thought that if you explained yourself more clearly, loved him more openly, became more patient, or showed him just how committed you were, he would eventually stop pulling away. But you cannot love someone into emotional readiness, and you cannot explain someone out of an attachment pattern they have not chosen to address. What you can do is stop contributing to the cycle. You can become more grounded. You can communicate your needs clearly when communication is appropriate. You can allow another adult to take responsibility for approaching you, and you can decide what you are willing and unwilling to accept. That is the real transformation. You are not becoming someone who does not care. You are becoming someone whose love does not disappear into anxiety every time another person needs space. There is a huge difference between loving someone and chasing them. There is a difference between being available and being constantly accessible. There is a difference between giving someone room and abandoning your own needs. And there is a difference between being patient and waiting forever. The goal is not to become the perfect woman who finally makes an avoidant man chase. The goal is to become emotionally secure enough that you can observe his behavior without losing yourself inside it. If he comes closer, you can meet him there. If he remains distant, you can acknowledge that reality. If he begins making genuine effort, you can decide whether that effort matches what you need. And if he does not, you can walk away without believing that his inability to show up defines your worth. Remember, the anxious pursuer and avoidant withdrawer cycle is not proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It is a learned pattern, and learned patterns can change. You can notice the urge, you can pause, you can regulate yourself, you can stop making his silence an emergency, you can give him the opportunity to choose connection for himself, and most importantly, you can choose yourself regardless of what he chooses. So, the next time he pulls away, remember the shift. Do not automatically chase. Do not rush to repair every moment of distance. Do not use silence as a weapon. Do not pretend you do not care. Simply step back, return your attention to your own life, and allow his actions to reveal what he is actually willing to give. Give the process time. New patterns rarely become natural overnight. Your nervous system may need time to become comfortable with uncertainty, and his may need time to experience closeness without feeling pressured. But as you stop initiating every repair, something important becomes possible. He gets the opportunity to move toward you because he wants to, not because your anxiety pulled him there. And you get the opportunity to discover whether he genuinely chooses you when you are no longer carrying the entire connection by yourself. That is the real difference between being pursued because someone feels pressured to respond and being approached because they genuinely want to be close. And that truth is worth far more than any temporary reassurance you could get by sending one more message. If this helped you understand your relationship differently, subscribe to Avoidant Decoded for more breakdowns on avoidant attachment, emotional distance, mixed signals, and the patterns that often hide underneath them. And if you made it this far, comment magnet below and tell me which part of this message described your experience most closely. Most importantly, remember this: you do not have to chase someone to prove that you are worth choosing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop reaching, return to yourself, and allow another person to show you what they are willing to do when you are no longer doing it for them. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Sometimes the greatest shift in an avoidant relationship begins when you stop chasing and start choosing yourself. Give him the space to decide whether he truly wants to move toward you while you protect your peace instead of waiting for his attention. You cannot force someone to become emotionally available, but you can become strong enough to stop accepting uncertainty as love. When you stop pursuing and allow his actions to speak, you finally discover whether he is coming closer because he genuinely wants you or because you are constantly pulling him there.